She collected insurance on 4 deaths, including her son. Why did police miss the poison trail? Her secrets sleep beneath the soil.
The humid air of downtown Pensacola hung heavy over the quiet streets on the afternoon of June 25, 1983. John Gentry walked out of a local restaurant and approached his parked Ford sedan. The street was mostly empty. He unlocked the heavy car door, slid behind the steering wheel, and turned the ignition key. The explosion shattered the afternoon silence. Metal tore through the chassis of the car, blowing out the glass windows and sending shockwaves echoing down the block. When emergency responders arrived, they found Gentry bleeding and critically injured, but miraculously alive. Investigators cordoned off the shattered vehicle, searching the twisted metal for a motive. They assumed it was a mob hit or a targeted retaliation against a businessman. They interviewed his fiancée, a polite, well-dressed woman named Judy Buenoano. She stood near the police tape, looking terrified, claiming that a mysterious enemy was trying to murder them both.
Wait, if the car bombing was meant to kill him, why would the person who did it stay around and talk to the police? Wouldn't she be afraid they would find something in her background?
She stayed because she thought she had covered her tracks entirely. But while police were examining the blasted metal of the car, they noticed something strange sitting on the bedside table in Gentry's hospital room. It was a small bottle of vitamin pills. Judy had been giving them to him daily to help him recover from a recent, mysterious stomach illness. When investigators sent those ordinary-looking pills to a forensic laboratory, they realized the bomb in the car was only a backup plan. The vitamins were laced with lethal amounts of arsenic, and that single discovery would unlock a decade of graves across 2 different states.
So the man survives a car bomb, only to find out he has been slowly poisoned by the woman waiting by his hospital bed? That changes the entire psychological profile of the crime.
To understand the sheer scale of what Pensacola investigators uncovered, you have to look back at the people Judy Buenoano left behind. Long before the explosion, she was known as Judias Welty, a woman with a difficult childhood who seemed to find stability and respectability in marriage. In 1971, she was married to James Goodyear, a sergeant in the United States Air Force. James had just returned home to Florida after serving a combat tour in Vietnam. He was a young, healthy man looking forward to civilian life with his wife and their children. He had survived a war zone, only to come home to a quiet house in a quiet suburb.
That is exactly the kind of setup that makes people trust someone implicitly. A military wife waiting for her husband to return gives her an immediate shield of community respectability. No one looks at her with suspicion.
They had no reason to. But within months of walking through his front door, James was admitted to the local hospital. He suffered from severe hallucinations, violent vomiting, and rapid organ failure. Doctors were baffled by the sudden decline of a healthy military man. On September 16, 1971, James Goodyear died. His death was officially ruled a natural medical mystery. Judy collected his life insurance, roughly $85,000, and moved on. 7 years later, in 1978, she was living in Colorado with a man named Bobby Joe Morris. He was a hard-working man, well-liked by his neighbors. But soon after Judy moved in, Bobby Joe developed a mysterious, agonizing illness. He too died in a hospital bed. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. Judy collected another insurance payout and returned to Florida.
2 healthy men, 2 mysterious hospitalizations, 2 immediate insurance payouts. How did no one in the family or the medical staff connect these events at the time?
Because the deaths happened 7 years apart, in different states, and under different names. Doctors in Colorado had absolutely no idea about a dead Air Force sergeant in Florida. But the most tragic loss was still to come. Judy had a son named Michael Goodyear. In 1979, Michael joined the Army. Shortly after enlisting, he developed severe heavy metal poisoning that destroyed the nerves in his arms and legs. He came home to his mother as a paraplegic. He weighed only 85 pounds and required heavy steel leg braces just to sit up.
Wait, a young man goes into the Army and suddenly develops heavy metal poisoning? Did the military doctors not investigate the source of the toxins?
They did investigate, but pinpointing the exact source of heavy metal exposure in a massive military environment can be difficult. They treated his symptoms, but the nerve damage was permanent. He was medically discharged and sent home to live with his mother. In the spring of 1980, Judy took her paralyzed son Michael on a canoe trip down the East River in Florida. She was accompanied by her younger son. According to the official police report filed by Judy, the canoe struck a submerged log in the dark water and flipped over. Judy and her younger son swam to the riverbank, but Michael, weighed down by his paralyzed limbs and heavy steel braces, sank into the swamp and drowned.
Hold on. A mother takes her paralyzed son, who cannot walk and wears steel weights on his legs, into a tippy canoe on a volatile Florida river? That is beyond negligent. Did the police accept that story immediately?
They conducted a standard inquiry, but it was officially ruled a tragic accident. There were no independent witnesses in the swamp to contradict her timeline. Once again, Judy collected the money. This time she received over $20,000 from a military life insurance policy. By 1983, she was living comfortably in Pensacola. She was running a beauty salon, driving a nice car, and engaged to John Gentry. She had legally changed her last name to Buenoano, which is a rough Spanish translation of the name Goodyear. And this is where the timeline catches up to the shattered Ford sedan in the cold open.
So John Gentry survives the blast, and police find the arsenic inside his vitamin capsules. How exactly does the investigation shift from a street crime to her?
It started with the physical debris. Investigators traced the specific wiring and dynamite used in the bomb to a man in a neighboring town. When detectives questioned him, he admitted he sold the explosives. But he told them he sold the materials directly to Judy Buenoano. He claimed she told him she needed the dynamite to blow up a stubborn tree stump on a piece of rural property she owned. Armed with this witness statement, police brought Judy into an interrogation room.
This is the critical moment. She has to know the police have the seller who identified her. Does she ask for a lawyer, or does she try to talk her way out of the room?
She tried to talk her way out, and this is where her carefully constructed facade began to collapse. When investigators asked her why she bought electrical wire and explosives, she offered a series of bizarre and contradictory explanations. First, she claimed she never bought dynamite at all and the seller was lying. Then, when confronted with the physical wire found at her home, she claimed she bought it to repair a broken household appliance. When detectives pushed harder on the massive gaps in her story, she suddenly changed tactics. She claimed she was pregnant with Gentry's child and was suffering from severe pregnancy stress.
She knew the hallway would end, right? So why keep lying? A fake pregnancy is incredibly easy for the police to disprove.
It was a massive psychological miscalculation. Investigators requested medical records and quickly proved she was not pregnant. In fact, she had undergone a tubal ligation years earlier. The lie gave police the probable cause they needed. They executed a search warrant on her home. Inside, they found wire matching the bomb, rolls of tape, and a receipt for the raw chemicals used to manufacture the poison pills. They also found hidden bank records showing she had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on John Gentry. She had forged his signature on the documents. The sole beneficiary was Judy Buenoano. Police arrested her for attempted murder. But the detectives in Pensacola realized that if she was willing to bomb a car for insurance money, they needed to look deep into her past. They started making phone calls to Colorado and the military archives.
This is where the case turns from a local attempted murder into a massive historical investigation. Where do the police even begin to pull those threads together?
The investigation expanded into a massive forensic operation across multiple legal jurisdictions. In 1984, prosecutors secured court orders to exhume the bodies of James Goodyear, Bobby Joe Morris, and Michael Goodyear. Digging up graves after a decade is a legally complex process, but the state argued there was clear probable cause to suspect chronic poisoning in all three historical cases.
Arsenic is a heavy metal, right? If a body has been buried in the ground for over 10 years, like James Goodyear, does the poison naturally degrade, or is it still detectable by a medical examiner?
That is the terrifying reality of arsenic poisoning. It does not degrade. In fact, it acts as a chemical preservative. When medical examiners opened the sealed caskets, they found the remains in a surprising state of preservation. Forensic toxicologists took careful samples of bone tissue, hair shafts, and fingernails. Because human hair grows at a predictable rate of roughly half an inch per month, toxicologists can use it to create a biological timeline of toxin exposure.
So they can read the hair samples almost like rings on a tree to see exactly when the poison was introduced into the bloodstream?
Exactly. The forensic analysis revealed massive, lethal concentrations of arsenic deep in the victim's tissues. In James Goodyear's case, experts testified that he had been fed fatal doses of arsenic shortly after returning from his military service in Vietnam. Bobby Joe Morris showed the exact same chemical pattern in his remains. But the defense team for Judy Buenoano fought this forensic evidence aggressively in court. They did not deny that arsenic was present in the bodies, but they fiercely challenged the prosecution's interpretation of how the poison got there.
How do you defend that to a jury? If 3 people closely connected to her all die of the exact same rare poison, what alternative theory could a defense attorney possibly present?
The defense argued that heavy metal exposure was common in the environment during that era. They pointed out that James Goodyear had been stationed in Vietnam, where he might have been exposed to toxic military defoliants or contaminated water. They argued that Bobby Joe Morris worked in an industrial environment where he could have unknowingly ingested heavy metals. And crucially, they argued that even if the victims were murdered by poison, the state had zero direct physical evidence proving Judy was the person who administered it. There were no fingerprints on a poison bottle from 1971. There were no eyewitnesses who ever saw her slip arsenic into a cup of coffee.
That is actually a significant legal hurdle. Proving someone died of poisoning is forensic science. Proving a specific person poured that poison 10 years ago is a completely different burden of proof. How did prosecutors bridge that gap without a confession?
Prosecutors built a heavy circumstantial case based on overwhelming behavioral patterns and obvious financial motive. They showed the jury the stacks of life insurance policies. They highlighted the timeline of the sudden illnesses, pointing out that the victims only got sick when they were living under Judy's roof, and their medical symptoms spiked precisely when she was their primary caregiver. To build momentum, the state decided not to try her for all the crimes at once. They tried her sequentially.
So if she gets acquitted on the very first trial, it might jeopardize the entire chain of cases. Which death did they start with?
They started with the murder of her paralyzed son, Michael. In 1984, she stood trial for his death. Prosecutors argued that Judy systematically poisoned Michael with arsenic over several months to weaken his immune system, paralyzed him, and then deliberately took him into the remote river canoe to drown him for the military insurance payout. The defense countered that the canoe flipping was a genuine, documented accident, and that the state was aggressively criminalizing a tragic family loss.
But wait. The medical examiner could prove Michael had arsenic in his system, but could they actually prove she intentionally flipped the canoe in the water? Or was the jury just asked to infer her murderous intent based on the poison?
That was the central tension in the courtroom. The defense argued there was massive reasonable doubt about the mechanics of the drowning itself, but the jury looked at the entire pattern of dark behavior, the forged life insurance documents, the confirmed heavy metal poisoning, and the sheer physical improbability of a mother taking a paralyzed boy in heavy steel braces into a volatile swamp. The jury convicted her of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Life in prison is a final outcome. She was already put away forever. Did prosecutors still spend the money and time to pursue the older cases?
They did, because they wanted the ultimate legal penalty. Later that same year, she was convicted for the attempted murder of John Gentry using the car bomb. And then, in 1985, she faced her most high-stakes trial for the 1971 murder of her first husband, James Goodyear. During this final trial, the forensic evidence regarding the exhumed arsenic was the star witness. The prosecution brought in medical experts to explain the lethal doses found in his bones. The defense again tried to raise reasonable doubt, arguing that the passage of 14 years made the scientific evidence inherently unreliable.
If the forensic science of testing exhumed hair and bone was scientifically sound, the defense was basically asking the jury to ignore the chemistry and focus on the time gap. Did the jury buy that argument?
They did not. The jury deliberated carefully and returned a guilty verdict for the premeditated murder of James Goodyear. Because of the cold, calculated nature of the crime, the obvious financial motive, and her documented history of extreme violence, the judge sentenced Judy Buenoano to death. For over a decade, Judy Buenoano sat in a small cell on death row at the Broward Correctional Institution. She exhausted every legal appeal available to her, continually maintaining her absolute innocence. She blamed environmental exposure, military chemicals, or simple bad luck for the trail of bodies left in her wake. But the appellate courts upheld the forensic science, the documented timelines, and the jury convictions. On March 30th, 1998, she was executed in Florida's electric chair. She was the first woman executed in the state of Florida since 1848.
It is truly haunting to think about the years she lived as a respected business owner and a grieving widow in her community. She hid a profound and calculating darkness directly behind the appearance of a normal, quiet life.
That is the enduring legacy of the Black Widow. She weaponized the act of caregiving. She turned daily vitamins into slow poison, a quiet river into a deliberate trap, and a loving home into a waiting room for death. She operated entirely in the blind spots of society, relying on the simple fact that no one expects the person making them soup to be the architect of their demise. If this case left you questioning how easily evidence can hide in plain sight, subscribe to True Crime Unveiled for more careful investigations into the darkest corners of the legal system.
And tell us in the comments what you believe was her ultimate undoing. Was it the sheer greed of the final insurance policy, or the arrogance of using a loud explosive when the quiet poison was already working?
If this episode was worth your time, leaving a like helps support the channel and keeps these factual, verified stories in front of people who still want the truth.
Stay safe and keep questioning everything.